gift of the century for Israel. Speaking about a historic deal to end the Palestinian-Israeli conflict dates back to the 2016 campaigning days, when Donald Trump kept fantasizing about the ultimate deal of the century. As a real estate mogul, negotiations that would bring about peace in the region appealed to the self-titled deal maker, who has had no idea about the complicated conflict.
I love Israel. I'm very pro-Israel. I would love to see a deal be made between Israel and the Palestinians. It's probably the hardest negotiation there is. Great negotiators have tried and they failed. It's just so deep-seated, the hatred, the level of distrust, but I'm going to give it an awfully good shot. I want to remain as neutral as possible, because if you're not somewhat neutral, the other side is never going to do it. But just remember, Israel, I love you. We're going to see if we can get something done. It has to be done for both sides. It cannot continue to be the way it is.
Moreover, Trump does not care about the Palestinian rights long negated by the international community, thanks to the influence exerted by the Israeli lobby across the world. Soon after Trump was chosen by the Israeli lobby in the US, as well as evangelicals, the fate of the deal could be easily anticipated.
This was the icing on the cake, what happened in Washington, D.C. This was the big finale. Now that Israel has achieved pretty much everything it desires, the United States wants to kind of create like this, put the final approval and the final stamp of Washington that now we can move to the next step. And the next step is normalization between a few Arab regimes in the Gulf region and Israel. So in my opinion, the deal of the century, or so-called deal of the century, is already being implemented.
Upon assuming office, Trump proved to be one of the most pro-Israel presidents the United States has ever had. He moved the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to the Palestinian capital Jerusalem Al-Quds. The move, despite being denounced internationally, amounted to the United States' recognition of the holy Muslim city as Israel's capital.
After more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering.
For Christian Zionists and the pro-Israel Jewish lobby, the news sounded like a dream come true. But Trump could not just stop. Soon he also recognized Syria's occupied Golan Heights as Israel's. All of that made Palestinians learn what to expect from the so-called deal of the century, making the initiative dead even before arrival. But now, the US president has revealed his so-called peace plan after meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his rival Benny Gantz in the White House.
Previous administration adhered to the so-called peace process, which is an American charade in the first place, aimed at ensuring American dominance in the region, or at least American political relevance in the region. And it was used as the platform in which the U.S. conducted its foreign policy, whether regarding Palestine, Israel, or the whole region, divided the region into moderates and radicals, extremists, pro-Americans, anti-Americans, and so forth and so on. Trump has completely exposed that charade and completely showed the extremely ugly face of American foreign policy, and is now siding with Israel openly. Now you would say, well, the previous administration sided with Israel openly as well. But the Trump administration is basically granting all of Israel's wishes all at once.
Trump has been bragging about how his so-called deal of the century is going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for good. But such an effort is unlikely to break through by a bankrupt real estate mogul who has proven to be anything but a negotiator. Palestinians have therefore turned their back against Trump, asserting that Al-Quds is not for sale.
أريد أن أقول للثنائي ترامب ونتنياهو إن القدس ليست للبيع وكل حقوقنا ليست للبيع وليست للمساومة وصفقتكم المؤامرة لن تمشي.
The US president has even ended the US support for the so-called two-state solution, clearly demonstrating the US priorities in favor of Israel rather than Palestinians. Not much has changed ever since. After all, it is known to the world that the United States has always been adopting policies that ease the Tel Aviv regime's expansive policies. Israel, meanwhile, continues its illegal construction of settlements, even if it means violation of international law.
The genius idea of Trump, let's give Israel exactly what it wants, and let's just pretend that the Palestinians are not there in the first place simply because, from American point of view, they are ineffectual. Now, what has been working well for the United States, unfortunately, is that the fact that some Arabs actually agree. Some Arab governments are willing to play according to the new rules. Now, I know that this is going to backfire. We have been following this history. I have been writing about this history for 70 years. We know every detail of it. And we know that if there is any possibility of this working, it would have worked a long time ago.
On the other hand, the long-awaited plan appears to be nothing but an intervention in the Israeli election, probably in favor of the Prime Minister's desperate campaign. Netanyahu has been at loggerheads with Gantz over taking the helm in Israel ahead of the March 2nd elections.
The President's peace plan is a significant and historic milestone indeed. Immediately after the election, I will work towards implementing it from within a stable, functioning Israeli government in tandem with the other countries in our region. President Trump and I also discussed the importance of dialogue with the Palestinians, the neighboring country, and the King of Jordan.
Netanyahu was facing corruption charges at home, which could endanger his premiership. Ironically, Trump is also in a similar legal situation as the Israeli Prime Minister, in that he is being impeached and faces a potential removal from office. The similar situation for the two world leaders is making them support one another to survive accusations against them.
I think the president has done something extraordinary. President Trump has brought forward a peace plan that enables us to make the deal of the century. It gives Israel security, it gives the Palestinians national dignity, it allows us to move forward so that we can live together. It's a deal that we should both make, and we're prepared to make it. I think the president did something that is concrete, that can work. You know, he's a very practical person, and at the same time he has a vision, and he put it through. I think we should all take this deal, and we should do it right away, and I call on the Palestinians. I know they have their objections, but I saw 3 Arab ambassadors there in that extraordinary ceremony, that the president got to be there. That's amazing.
Yet, in reality, Trump is offering a so-called deal of the century to salvage Netanyahu's premiership while boosting his own image among evangelicals and the pro-Israel Jewish lobby in America, which are spending millions of dollars for a second Trump term.
This American plan, so-called American plan, is actually an Israeli plan. Even Saeb Erekat himself has said just today, he said that Netanyahu has offered this to us in 2011 and we rejected it. So it's a rehash of previous plans. According to Erekat, is the 88th attempt at basically pushing Palestinians into a corner and forcing them to accept something that is not consistent with international law. There's absolutely no reason why this particular plan is going to work while the other 87 plans failed. But what is sad about all of this is that this supposed plan happens completely in disregard of the political existence of Palestinians.
Trump has suggested that Palestinians would ultimately have no choice but to acquiesce to the deal. But so far, the Palestinian leaders have shown resistance, asserting that Trump cannot buy them with the $50 billion investment fund.
And what's Mahmoud Abbas's position in terms of speaking directly with Donald Trump or with Benjamin Netanyahu about this plan, or indeed any other plan he may have?
Well, he hasn't spoken with Mr. Trump or the Trump administration for more than 2 years. The Palestinians boycotted this process after the Trump administration moved its embassy to Jerusalem and recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. At that point, they said, we know where this is going. There's no point in engaging in it. And in fact, Mr. Abbas said, I was right. I was right to say that all along. Some people said, wait and see what the plan actually is. But in fact, now that we see the plan, we can see that this is where it was headed. And so he has made no suggestion that that is going to change, as he has rejected the plan put forward by Mr. Trump. And the president of the United States has said he's going to give the Palestinians some time to try to rethink whether they're going to change their position. And in some of the reporting about that, it was suggested that perhaps Mr. Trump is even thinking after Mr. Abbas there may be more compliance. I don't know if that is true. But certainly Mr. Abbas has been quite firm about his response. In fact, we even were told that he rejected a telephone call from Mr. Trump ahead of time to talk about the release.
Just like the rest of the Muslim world population, Palestinians consider Jerusalem al-Quds as the capital of their future state, and no one will be satisfied by 179 infrastructure and business projects that Trump's Jewish son-in-law Jared Kushner has proposed to them. Israel, meanwhile, continues its aggression against the Muslim population of Palestine, denying them their absolute right in their own motherland, and building illegal settlements in defiance of the Geneva Conventions.
President Trump is under the impression that he is a genius. This man can make no mistake, and he always has these kind of elaborate visions for his country and for the rest of the world. And of course, this is not true at all. If anything, U.S. foreign policy under Trump proved even more disastrous than under his predecessors. Now, his genius idea is very simple. As Jared Kushner said in an interview recently, he said Palestinians need to stop believing in fairy tales. You know, Israel has the power. Israel has the complete support of the U.S. Congress. Israel has the sympathy of American media and American people. And therefore, Palestinians are of no use to the United States.
A nation in debt. The United States is a nation in debt, an issue that can be explored from various aspects. The sum of the debt owed by the US federal government amounts to around $23 trillion, the largest sovereign debt in the world for a single country. The debt is so high that it runs neck and neck with that of the European Union, which consists of 28 member states.
We have, during his regime, during President Obama's regime, we've doubled our national debt. We're up to $20 trillion.
Apart from being too much, the US debt has been steadily rising. It was $10 trillion around a decade ago and is projected to rise to $34 trillion at the end of the coming decade. Considering the fact that the US sees itself as a superpower and the leader of the world, such figures say a lot about where the nation is heading in the future. So, is the US debt too much? In other words, how much debt is too much?
It depends on who you ask if the U.S. debt is too much. I would say it could be potentially at $24 trillion. It's larger than the U.S. gross domestic product by about 6%. That means for every dollar of wealth we create, we have to borrow 106 cents. That's not a sustainable model over the long term. So it's not just the size of the debt, it's its relationship to gross domestic product, which is, for me, too high.
Being indebted is also a common phenomenon among ordinary Americans, more than 189 million of whom have credit cards, meaning each household with a credit card carries $8,398 in credit card debt. That has made the nation struggle to climb out of debt, with many Americans feeling fed up.
My name is Diane McLeod. I was born and raised in Philadelphia. Right now I live in Croydon. And the debt I'm carrying all total is probably about $286,000. Give or take $1 or $2.
Diane McLeod's debt is the result of financial missteps, unfortunate circumstances, and a lending industry willing to extend her more credit than she could possibly repay.
A lot of my friends don't know what's going on. Some of my very close girlfriends do. But I have not let it been widely known because I'm embarrassed.
Across America, as home prices have fallen and the cost of living have gone up, more and more Americans like Diane McLeod are facing financial ruin.
To put it into perspective, an American citizen is born indebted and has to struggle for the rest of their life to defray it. Unable to pay their obligations or provide for their families, a significant number of Americans have been forced into insolvency or foreclosure.
Well, under President Trump, the national debt has risen. He's expecting to raise it about $5.5 trillion during his first four-year term. If he were to get reelected, we could anticipate that debt would rise upwards of $10 to $11 trillion over 8 years. It would essentially rise 50% inside of 8 years. We've said that it's already too high. We need to look at steps that would reduce the debt, not expand it by 50%.
The US government has been promoting the idea of being in debt by goading Americans to have things now and pay for them in the future. Credit cards, therefore, could serve as a trap for citizens, one many are mulling to escape from.
It traps you. It just traps you, and it's too, it's that trap is reason enough for me to say, just don't even touch them. Don't even mess with them. There's this freedom that if you don't have credit card debt right now, you're living in that you probably don't realize you're living in. And I'm saying from the other side, don't fall for the trap, okay? That's what I'm saying.
Like all families in the world, Americans also want to buy homes and cars and send their children to college. But for them, it would result in debts piling up more and more. America has been branded as the land of opportunity and wealth, but the backbreaking indebtedness is taking its toll on many of the families, particularly the vulnerable ones in the bottom half of the income distribution. But what should be done to shrink the US national debt?
Well, Congress has dictated that it wants to expand spending. That's fine as long as it contributes to GDP growth. As we said, we're looking more at the ratio of the debt rather than the outright level of the debt. So we want to get that deficit debt to GDP ratio back under 100%. If the economy were to accelerate, we think we could achieve that goal. If, however, the economy were to lapse into a recession, which is a very realistic threat, then we would expect the ratio to worsen. So we're carefully watching the spending that we've got already and sending a message to Congress that we cannot sustain this behavior of increasing debt and debt to GDP ratio. So that would mean less fiscal spending in the event of an economic downturn.
Putting all of the previous facts and figures aside, indebtedness is part of the daily life of the American society right now. The record $13.86 trillion of debt for the second quarter was up $219 billion from the previous quarter, and up $1.2 trillion over the previous record high of $12.68 trillion in the third quarter of 2008.
There's always a considerable lag involved, and it depends to a very large extent on what the state of politics is. When you have, say, a conjoining of Republicans and Democrats on a specific policy, almost irrespective of what the data are doing, that gets implemented. But today, we have the most severe differences that I was about to say that I've seen back to the Civil War, but I've just been part of a book, co-author of a book on the economic history of the United States. So I'm steeped in the history, and I can tell you there's been nothing like this in American history.
According to statistics released by the New York Federal Reserve, consumer debt was approaching $14 trillion after the second quarter of 2019, marking the 20th consecutive quarter for an increase.
As their consumer debt outstanding continues to grow, that creates more leverage. They're more highly leveraged and at risk of a default, either a personal bankruptcy, and God forbid they lose their job, or they have a sudden increase in expenses due to a medical emergency. So is there a government solution to that? That's debatable. We don't think that this is in the realm of the Fed and monetary policy. It's more in the realm of fiscal policy and social policy.
Under President Trump, debt in the United States has been rising from all sides, a phenomenon that harms the livelihood of the lower class more than anyone else. People in the United States are therefore facing a consistent growth in all areas of debt, namely home, auto, student loans, and credit cards.
Take this statement on military spending.
You're going to make the country rich again and strong again so that you can afford it. And so you can afford military and all of the other things.
I don't know what that was. To be honest, it sounds like the audiobook of A Farewell to Arms broadcast by an iPhone submerged in hot coffee. But apparently Mulvaney heard increased defence spending by $54 billion because that is what he's proposing. And as for the budget's funding for nuclear weapons, they presumably had their bases in statements like this one.
Putin has built up their military again and again and again. Their military is much stronger. He's doing nuclear. We're not doing anything. Our nuclear is old and tired, and his nuclear is tippy-top from what I hear.
Again, I don't know how you turn that into policy. Let's trickle-dickle some money bunnies into our boom-boom budget. We're aiming for tippy-top people because, remember, we're talking about the most lethal weapons in the history of mankind. So if we can, tippy-top.